If you've got a New Year resolutions, it's time to take it and just throw it away. Like honestly, just chuck it away. Don't look at it. Don't read back on what you wrote down. It's not going to work. In this particular video, we're going to be talking about three things. Firstly, we're going to be looking at why New Year resolutions do not work. Secondly, we're going to be looking at how you can achieve your goal without a New Year resolution and instead using habits and why they work. And lastly, we're going to be discussing the 4-step framework that you can use as of today to improve your goal achievement for the new year, so that by the time you get to the end of it, you're much more likely to stick with your objectives and the goals that you set yourself for this year. Now, you may be sitting there and wondering, why are you telling me that New Year resolutions do not work? It's the 1st of January and you're already taking me down. Well, I'm just opening up the conversation around New Year resolutions not working, and it's probably a good idea for you to be aware of it now rather than 4 months down the line where you would have wasted a whole lot of time. Now, just to give you a little bit of context, there has been some studies that have been carried out, and some 67 million American adults made New Year resolutions to improve their health in 2021, according to some surveys. But of those who made healthy resolutions, 18% already failed by January, and 41% were no longer on track with their top resolutions by July. Now, those statistics speak quite loudly. They are pointing to the fact that a good 41% of people by the mid-year are already not on track with the New Year resolution anymore. So why follow a methodology or a mindset which is clearly quite archaic and has shown not to work properly over the years? The reason why New Year resolutions do not work is for a number of reasons. The very first one is because as the year starts and we start feeling motivated about this blank canvas that we can paint with all our colors, we find that the motivation level begins dropping as the week go by. So we may start very energetic, we may start very inspired, very highly motivated, but as time goes by, the amount of motivation drops. And that's quite important to be aware of, because if, for example, you've set yourself a target that you want to lose weight or you want to eat healthier, the fact of the matter is that life happens. And as life happens, it throws you curveballs. And maybe one time you're traveling for work, maybe one time you're tired, your working hours increase, maybe you start chasing a promotion. And as you do all of those things, it makes it harder and harder for you to be able to achieve that healthier lifestyle that you set yourself to be. As a second point, the goals that we set are not very realistic. Going back to the example of losing weight, we could say that I want to lose weight, and yes, it's a goal, but it's not a very specific one. If we go back and think a little bit further about this goal and set something a bit more specific, maybe we can add a number onto it. And if I think about the year coming ahead, I could say, okay, I want to lose perhaps 12 kilos over the coming year. This is becoming a much better goal because you're not just losing weight, which is very ambiguous and like some random image in my head, but now you're adding a number onto it and you say 12 kilos. But you can still take a step further. And that step further perhaps could be, I want to lose 1 kg per month. And that 1 kg per month then can be taken one step further, and you can quantify the number of calories that you need to cut from your diet on a daily basis to be able to achieve that goal. Now, you have something which is really actionable. Cutting out 250 calories a day for a whole year to achieve your 12 kilo loss, that becomes very actionable. You can track it, and it becomes a goal which is easy to achieve, or much easier to achieve than the ambiguous I want to lose weight. And the third reason as to why New Year resolutions don't work is because we don't ask ourselves the why we're doing that. We may pick up New Year resolutions from having a conversation with our friends. Perhaps we see an inspiring social media episode around someone doing something amazing for 2023 and we want to follow suit because we are inspired by it. But we're not asking ourselves, why do we want to achieve it? So if we go back to the weight loss example, It's great to lose weight, but why are we doing it? And if we ask ourselves why, we may be finding those underlying reasons that truly mean something to us, which is more worthwhile. And those reasons could be health. Perhaps some members of your family may have diabetes or heart conditions, and you feel and believe that by improving your own health, you reduce that risk so that you can be healthy for your family. But fundamentally, asking yourself why and going into these layers and looking at those fundamental root causes can get you closer to your goal and aligned with the true why. So now that I've spent a good few minutes talking about why your New Year resolution is not going to work, let's look at what we can do instead. So it's not all doom and gloom. What I'm suggesting here is that you need to build a habit and make that your key priority for 2023. And why are we talking about habit building? That's because habits are good mechanisms to change behaviors. And if you look at all of the things that we mentioned earlier, such as, for example, wanting to lose weight, wanting to be fitter, spending more time with family, improving your finances, those are all examples of behavior changes. So that means that we want to go from behavior A to behavior B. And because we have a behavior that already exists in our life, it means that we already have habits that need to be changed. And the only way to be able to build a new habit is to replace what you currently have in place and remove all of the triggers, remove all of the elements and understand them to be able to be successful and move to your new state. You can think of your brain as perhaps having a number of roads inside of it. So you've got little roads connecting neurons to neurons within your brain, and neurons are practically what's in charge or responsible for your emotions, for your action, for your senses. And those connections between neurons are what allow your body to work. Now, when something exists, such as a routine or a habit within your day-to-day, it essentially means that you have a certain connection within your brain which is used very frequently. And because you've got a pre-existing connection, the action you're attempting to take is very easy. So if I look at my morning routine, waking up and making myself a coffee in the morning is a fairly effortless action. And the reason why that's the case is because I've been doing that for years. And I'm not saying that making coffee in the morning is necessarily good or bad, but what I'm saying is that that particular action is being repeated over and over and over again. And as I'm doing it, I'm reinforcing that behavior and I am making that path stronger and stronger and stronger, becoming more and more effortless. Now, the great news is that we can use this concept, we can use the science, and we can use the learnings that I've made from James Clear's book on Atomic Habits to our advantage to build new habits. Now, this 4-step framework that I'm about to talk about is what helps you in building those new routines and habits that will then allow you to hit your objectives at the end of the year. So as a first step that we're going to be doing is to map every single activity that we do from morning to night. Last year, when I was preparing to run my half marathon, this is exactly what I did. I taken a piece of paper, waking up in the morning, and from morning to night, I began mapping every single activity I did and the time of the day. The purpose of this is to identify 2 things. Firstly, you want to identify every single habit that you already have, and then you want to be classifying them and identifying whether it's a good habit or a bad habit. What you'll find as you go through your day is that you will find some things which are really obvious. So perhaps your morning routine, such as taking a shower, or perhaps such as making your morning beverage or your breakfast perhaps. During the day, you will find your eating habits will be quite obvious. Perhaps you eat at the same time every day and you'll find that quite obvious. But some other things will be less obvious, and perhaps those are the sneaky ones. So for instance, you'll find that you may be checking your phone more frequently than you expected, or you may be spending more time on social media or more time on the TV. And as you build up this list of the various activities that you do through the day, at the end of the day, what you want to be doing is to go through that particular list and mark whether something is good or bad. Now that we have this list, we can take the good habits and we can mark the ones that are really strong, and we can use them as a foundation to build new ones. Now, this concept is called habit stacking, and it's a fantastic concept because it allows us to use the pre-existing strong neural pathways in our brain and use them to the purpose of building a new habit. This allows the initial friction, the initial high level of energy that is required to start something new to be reduced, and it makes the transition onto this new journey a little bit easier. So in my particular case, when I was looking to build this new training regime for the half marathon, I was essentially moving from a position where I was doing cycling, which is a completely different sport, moving to a space where I was running 4 times a week and I was doing 2 strength classes a week. So this regime was a lot tougher, a lot harder, and training different muscles. And what I decided to do was to use the pre-existing foundation of drinking coffee, which I mentioned a few times, and using that as a starting platform to begin my new routine of running. The reason why habit stacking is important is because we are associating a habit that we want to build to something that already pre-exists. What a lot of people tend to do instead is to say, from this day onward, at 7 o'clock in the morning, or every morning, or in the evening, I'm going to go running, or I'm going to be going to the gym, or I'm going to be spending time with family. And the problem with this is that our brain doesn't have a lot of preconception around what time means. So if we tell our brain that at 7 a.m. we're going to be doing something, the brain is going to be like, I don't know, you do what you want to do. Instead, if we take a routine action that we perform, unconditional time, and we say that after we do this particular action, I'm going to be doing B, doing that B is much more likely to happen. Step 3 of the habit formation is to introduce the new habit. And we do this with this 4-step process called cue, craving, response, and reward. This is the loop that habits go through when they're being formed. And just to explain the concept of it, for instance, if I receive a text message whilst I'm working, the vibration that I receive on my phone is essentially the cue that makes me aware of something happening in my environment. And my brain is always looking for new things as I'm working through the days. I've got the attention span of a squirrel, so I'll be looking out for anything. And as the cue comes in and as the vibration makes me aware of something happening on my phone, I begin craving and wanting to have a look at what that notification is. So I pick up my phone, switch on the screen, and I read the notification, which then in turn gives me a reward, in this case probably a hit of dopamine that makes me happy and satisfied for having looked at the notification. Now this is what I classify as negative habits, and negative positive habits are always going to be subjective. What's positive to me may be negative to you and vice versa, but it still helps to explain the process. Now, when you're building your new routine, what you want to be doing is questioning each stage of the loop to try and make it better and easier and simpler for you to build your new routine. So for instance, when we're looking at cues, you want to be asking yourself, how can you make the cue more obvious? So when I was training last year, the first thing I started to do is to question myself and ask myself the question of, what can I do to make the running regimen more obvious in the morning? And you may not be agreeing with what I decided to do, which was to wear my running kit at night in the bed and wake up with my running kit. But that really helped me to remove that friction and make the running action obvious in the morning. The second thing I also decided to do was to take my running shoes and place them next to my coffee machine area, so that when I went to make the coffee, because you know I was stuck in my habit, it also meant that I saw my running shoes and they were already unlaced and ready to go. So I made the cue of the running action very, very obvious. When it comes to craving, I ask myself, how can I make it more attractive? So there is a couple of things that you can do here. You can think about the ways in which the action of running can become attractive to you in the short term. So perhaps that could be budding up with people across the internet so that you can keep yourself motivated. It may be finding yourself a running group, or it may be finding yourself a running program that almost works as a personal trainer. So you can have one of those in-ear training programs that tells you to run faster, to run slower, to run for a longer period of time, but essentially something that keeps you motivated whilst you're out there. And I decided to use the latter together with budding up with other people going through the same experience to make the whole experience more attractive. And then when it came to the response, the question to be asked is, how can I make it easier? And in terms of making it easier, I started thinking about how can I do this in such a way that it becomes achievable. So when it comes to running, the program that I had found was helping with that already. So the program, it got me into stages of running and walking, to a point where I was running for perhaps 30 minutes to 40 minutes, to a point where I was doing interval training. But it essentially allowed me to transition from a point where I wasn't doing a lot of running to a point where I was able to run 6, 7, 8 miles in a row and capable of sustaining that. And the last stage of the habit loop is understanding how to reward yourself. This is especially important because as you build a new foundation, the dopamine hit that you will get from completing the action may not be very strong. So you want to be able to reward yourself and associate that positive behavior with the action that you're doing. So in the case of my training regime last year, I started introducing chocolate at dinner training, or I introduced another coffee perhaps, and that really helped to reinforce the positive message that, or I guess the positive reward that I was receiving from being able to complete a training session. The very last step of building a new habit is have a plan B. And here we're not talking a plan B that comes up when things go wrong. Here I'm talking about putting together a plan B even before things go wrong. So in the case of my training regime, I started looking and thinking about what can I do when things go wrong, either from a weather perspective, or they go wrong from an injury perspective, or perhaps a motivation. And I came up with a series of plans that allow me to overcome those obstacles as they came around. For instance, when I injured my knee, I already had a backup plan to be able to go back to the bike or sign up to a gym nearby and get some swimming lessons in, so that I would be able to keep up the fitness level and at the same time not lose the continuity that I had built in the habit formation. So this is kind of it in a nutshell. We've gone through the habit formation, the framework that you can use from today onwards to achieve your goal. I've explained why that's more successful than coming up with a resolution, and I've also gone through and explained why resolutions don't really work. So it's time to take the resolution, throw it away, and instead think about the habit that you need to build from today for the rest of the year to be able to achieve your objective. Thank you for listening, and make sure you subscribe to our videos and to our playlist.